James Richardson had everything money could buy. A mansion worth $15 million, cars that cost more than most people's houses, a tech company that brought in millions every month. But as he sat in the back of his town car that Tuesday afternoon, staring at his phone, he felt empty. His meeting in Seattle had been canceled. Some emergency on the client's end. Instead of spending 3 days away from home like he planned, he was heading back after just 4 hours. The driver pulled through the iron gates of his estate, and James barely looked up from his emails. "Thank you, Dennis," he said, stepping out of the car. The house stood before him, massive and silent. It had been 2 years since his wife died. 2 years of trying to fill the void with work, with money, with anything that would make him forget the loneliness that crept in during quiet moments. He walked toward the front door, then stopped. His briefcase felt heavy in his hand. The house felt even heavier. For a moment he stood there in the driveway, a man worth hundreds of millions, afraid to enter his own home. Inside he could hear something unusual. Laughter. Not the quiet, polite kind. Real laughter. The kind that came from deep in the belly. His 8-year-old twins, Lily and Lucas, were laughing about something. When was the last time he'd heard that sound? James changed direction, walking around to the side entrance instead. He wasn't sure why. Maybe he wanted to see what was making them so happy before they knew he was home. Maybe he was tired of the way they went quiet when he entered a room, like his presence sucked the joy out of everything. The side door opened into a hallway that led to the kitchen. As he got closer, he heard more than laughter. There was singing. Someone was singing an old song, one he remembered from his childhood, and his children were joining in, off-key and enthusiastic. He set down his briefcase carefully, quietly. Then he moved closer to the kitchen doorway and looked inside. What he saw made him freeze. The massive kitchen island, which usually sat pristine and empty, was covered with papers, coins, and what looked like pictures cut from magazines. His daughter Lily sat on one side wearing an apron that was far too big for her. His son Lucas stood behind a cardboard box that had been turned into a makeshift counter. And there in the middle of it all was Helen. Helen Carter was their housekeeper. She'd been with them for 6 months. James had hired her through an agency, barely interviewed her himself. She was in her mid-50s, always arrived on time, kept the house spotless, and picked up the twins from school when he couldn't. Which was most days. He paid her well and rarely spoke to her beyond simple instructions. But right now Helen was doing something he'd never seen before. "Okay, Lily," Helen was saying, her voice warm and patient. "You're a mama with 2 kids. You work at a restaurant and a store. You got $200 for the whole week. That's got to cover food, bills, and maybe something extra if you're lucky." Lily nodded seriously, spreading the coins in front of her. Real coins from somewhere. Quarters, dimes, nickels. "Lucas, you're the grocery man," Helen continued. "Your job is to be fair but honest. Tell her what things cost." Lucas picked up one of the magazine cutouts. "Milk is $5, he announced. James watched his daughter bite her lip, counting coins. "That's a lot," she said. "It is," Helen agreed. "So what do you do?" Do we need milk?" "Well, you got 2 kids. They need strong bones. But you also need to pay the electric bill. Or the lights go off. What do you think?" James leaned against the doorway, forgotten. He watched his daughter struggle with the decision, her little face serious. When had he ever asked her to think about choices like this? When had he ever taught her that money wasn't unlimited? "I'll buy the milk," Lily finally said. "But the smaller one. And maybe we don't buy juice this week." "Smart thinking," Helen said, and his daughter's face lit up. "See, that's called prioritizing. Big word, but it just means figuring out what matters most." "Prioritizing," Lucas repeated, sounding it out. For the next 20 minutes, James stood there watching. Helen had created an entire world on his kitchen island. She had lists of expenses, pictures of food and bills, and she'd turned his children into people who had to think, plan, and make hard choices. "Now," Helen said. "Lily saved $10 this week by making smart choices. What should she do with it?" "Buy a toy," Lucas shouted. "Maybe," Helen said with a smile. "But what if next week the car breaks down? Or someone gets sick?" "Save it?" Lily asked. "Could do. Or maybe spend 5 and save 5. Life's about balance, baby girl. You can't save every penny and never have fun. But you can't spend every penny and have nothing when trouble comes. And trouble always comes eventually. James felt something twist in his chest. His children lived in a 16,000 square foot house. They had every toy, every game, every piece of technology money could buy. And they were bored, always wanting the next thing. But right now, playing with coins and paper, they were completely focused. "Miss Helen," Lily said suddenly, "is this how you lived when you had kids?" Helen's face softened. "Yes, baby. Except I had 3 kids and even less money. Some weeks I had to choose between paying the water bill and buying enough food. I chose food. We took showers at my mama's house." James saw his son's eyes go wide. "You didn't have water?" "Not always. But we had each other. And I made sure my babies knew how to stretch a dollar, how to cook a meal, how to fix things when they broke, because I couldn't afford to replace everything or hire people to fix everything. We had to learn." "Were your kids sad?" Lily asked quietly. Helen laughed, a deep, genuine sound. "Sometimes, sure, they wanted things their friends had. But you know what? All 3 of them are grown now. They have good jobs. They own their own homes. They know how to take care of themselves and their families. And they call me every Sunday to say thank you." "For what?" Lucas asked. "For teaching them that being rich isn't about having money. It's about knowing how to handle whatever life throws at you. That's real wealth, baby. When you don't fall apart the first time things get hard." James stepped back from the doorway. His hands were shaking. He moved quietly down the hall, picked up his briefcase, and went upstairs to his office. He sat at his desk for a long time, not working, just thinking. His children were being raised by nannies and housekeepers and tutors. They had everything except what they needed most. Someone to teach them about real life, someone to show them that the world wasn't just their bubble of privilege. And somehow Helen had seen that. She'd taken it upon herself to fill that gap. He thought about his own childhood. His parents had money, but not like this. He'd had chores. He'd earned his allowance. He'd learned to work for things. Somewhere along the way, in trying to give his children everything, he'd given them nothing. The cancer had taken his wife so quickly. One day she was there, planning the twins' birthday party. 6 months later, she was gone. And he'd thrown himself into work because he didn't know how else to cope. He'd thought providing for his children meant making money, building wealth, securing their future. He'd never thought about who would teach them how to be human beings. James opened his laptop, but he didn't check emails. Instead, he opened his calendar and started making changes. He needed to see more of what was happening in his own home. He needed to understand what else Helen was teaching his children. And maybe, just maybe, he needed to learn those lessons himself. James started coming home early. Not every day, but enough. He'd tell his assistant to clear his afternoons twice a week, saying he had personal matters to attend to. Which was true in a way. He was attending to something he should have been paying attention to all along. The first few times he did what he'd done before. Came in quietly through the side door, watched from hallways and doorways, listened from behind corners like some kind of spy in his own house. He felt ridiculous doing it. A grown man, a CEO hiding in his own home. But every time he thought about stopping, he'd hear Helen's voice floating from somewhere in the house, patient and kind, teaching his children something he didn't even know they needed to learn. On Thursday, he found them in the backyard, not on the playground equipment that had cost $40,000 and sat mostly unused. They were in the far corner of the property near the fence where Helen had apparently started a garden. A garden, on his perfectly manicured lawn. James stood by the window in the library, watching. Helen was on her knees in the dirt, showing Lily how to plant something. Lucas was digging with a small shovel, his expensive sneakers caked with mud. "See this little seed?" Helen was saying. "Looks like nothing, right? Smaller than your fingernail. But you put it in good soil, give it water and sunshine, and in a few months you'll have tomatoes. Maybe 20, 30 tomatoes from this one tiny seed." "That's magic," Lily whispered. "That's nature, baby. And it's better than magic because it's real. You know what this teaches you?" Both kids shook their heads. "Patience. You can't rush a tomato. You can't pay extra to make it grow faster. You just have to take care of it every day and wait. And faith. You gotta have faith that if you do the work, the harvest will come." James watched his son pat dirt around a seed with intense concentration. When was the last time Lucas had concentrated on anything for more than 5 minutes? The boy got bored with his toys before James even finished putting the batteries in. "Miss Helen," Lucas said, "why do we need to grow food? Daddy can just buy food." He sure can. Your daddy's a blessed man with lots of money. But let me ask you something. What if one day the stores ran out of food? Or what if you grow up and you don't have as much money as your daddy? Wouldn't it be good to know how to feed yourself? I guess so. Plus, Helen continued, standing up and stretching her back, there's something special about eating food you grew yourself. You appreciate it more, you don't waste it, and you understand where food really comes from. Not from a store. From the earth. From hard work. Over the next 2 weeks, James kept watching. He started to see patterns. Helen wasn't just cleaning his house and picking up his kids. She was running what looked like a secret school. On Monday, he found them in the laundry room. Helen was teaching them how to sort clothes, read labels, treat stains. Things he'd never once thought about because someone had always done his laundry for him. Even as a kid, his mother had handled it. This shirt is inside out, Helen was telling Lucas. Always check before you wash. And see this tag? Says cold water only. Hot water will make it shrink. Why do we need to know this? Lily asked. You do the laundry. Baby girl, I won't always be here. One day you'll be in college or in your own apartment, and you'll need to know how to take care of yourself. I've seen rich kids go off to school and ruin all their clothes because nobody taught them basics. On Wednesday, he found them in the kitchen again. This time Helen was teaching them to cook. Not the fancy kind of cooking his private chef did. Simple food. Scrambled eggs, grilled cheese sandwiches, rice and beans. You measure the rice like this, Helen demonstrated. 2 parts water to 1 part rice. And you don't need fancy equipment. Just a pot, some heat, and patience. This is boring, Lucas complained. Can't we just order pizza? Sure you could. Pizza's easy. But what if you're hungry and broke? What if you need to feed your own kids one day and you don't have money for takeout? A bag of rice costs $3 and feeds you for a week. A pizza costs $15 and feeds you for 1 night. Which is smarter? James watched his son think about it. Actually think. Process the information. Come to a conclusion. The rice, Lucas finally said, that's right. Being smart with money isn't about being cheap. It's about knowing your options and making good choices. Friday afternoon, James came home to find the house empty. He felt a moment of panic. Where were his children? Then he saw a note on the kitchen counter in Helen's neat handwriting. Taking kids to community center. Back by 5 community center? What community center? James grabbed his phone and opened the tracking app. He'd installed it on the twins' phones for safety. The dot showed they were across town, in a neighborhood he'd never visited. A neighborhood where the houses didn't cost millions. Where people worked regular jobs and worried about paying bills. He sat down hard on a kitchen stool. Helen had been taking his children somewhere and he'd had no idea. Well, that wasn't exactly true. He'd given her blanket permission to take them on educational outings. He'd just never asked where they went. Never cared, as long as they were safe and supervised. What kind of father was he? When they came home at 5:15, James was waiting in the living room, pretending to read a book. He heard them before he saw them. Did you see how happy Mrs. Rodriguez was? Lily was saying. Just because we read to her. She said we were the highlight of her week, Lucas added. She gave us cookies. They came around the corner and stopped when they saw James. Their faces changed. Not unhappy exactly, just surprised, and maybe a little guarded. Dad, Lily said, you're home early. Meeting got canceled, he said, setting down his book. Where have you been? He saw Helen stiffen. She stepped forward slightly as if to shield the children from something. I took them to volunteer, she said quietly, at the senior center. We go most Fridays. It's on the activity permission form you signed. James had signed so many forms. He barely read them anymore. What do you do there? He asked, looking at his kids. We read to old people who can't see good anymore, Lucas said, and we play board games with them. And sometimes we just talk to them because Miss Helen says lots of them are lonely. Some of those seniors don't get visitors, Helen added. Your kids brighten their whole week, and it teaches them something important. What's that? James asked. That they have something to give that isn't money. Time, attention, kindness. Those things matter just as much as dollars, maybe more. James felt that twist in his chest again. How long have you been doing this? 3 months, Helen said. She lifted her chin slightly like she was preparing for a fight. I should have asked you directly. I know that. But you're always so busy and I thought it was good for them. It is good for us, Lily said suddenly. Mrs. Rodriguez tells the best stories, and Mr. Chen taught me how to play chess, and Miss Dorothy knows like a million old songs. James looked at his children, really looked at them. They were different from 3 months ago. Less whiny, less demanding. When had that happened? Tell me more, he said. Tell me about the people you've met. They did. For the next hour, his children sat with him and talked. Really talked. Not the usual one-word answers he got when he asked about their day. They told him stories about elderly people who'd lived fascinating lives. A woman who'd been a nurse in the war. A man who'd built his own house with his bare hands. A lady who'd raised 9 children by herself. Helen stood near the doorway watching. When the kids finally ran upstairs to wash up for dinner, James called to her. Helen, wait. She turned, her expression careful. Yes, sir? How much am I paying you? She blinked, surprised. $45,000 a year, why? That's not enough. Sir, I'm just the housekeeper. No, James said slowly. You're not. You're teaching my children things I should have taught them, things I don't even know how to teach them because nobody taught me. Helen said nothing, just watched him with those wise eyes. I've been watching, he admitted, the last couple weeks. The garden. The cooking lessons. The budgeting game. I saw it all. He expected her to be angry or embarrassed. Instead, she just nodded. I figured you might be. You're quieter when you come home now. Why didn't you say anything? Because you needed to see for yourself. If I'd told you, you might have just nodded and gone back to work. But seeing it, that's different. That gets in your heart. She was right. It had gotten into his heart. I'm not doing anything wrong, Helen said firmly. I'm not undermining you or trying to replace you. But those babies need more than money, Mr. Richardson. They need skills. They need character. They need to understand the world beyond these walls. I know, James said quietly. I know they do. And I'm grateful. But Helen, I need to ask you something. What's that? Would you teach me too? Helen stared at James for a long moment. Then she did something he didn't expect. She laughed. Not a mocking laugh, but something warm and surprised. You want me to teach you? Yes? Mr. Richardson, you run a company worth hundreds of millions. You have people with fancy degrees working for you. And you want me, a housekeeper with a high school diploma, to teach you? I have an MBA from Stanford, James said. I can read a profit and loss statement in my sleep. I can negotiate contracts worth millions, but I can't cook a meal. I've never grown anything. I don't know how to fix a leaky faucet or sew on a button. My kids are learning life skills from you, and I'm realizing I don't have those skills either. Helen sat down on the couch across from him. She looked tired suddenly. Your wife knew all those things, she said softly. She used to cook sometimes, even though you had a chef. I found her recipes in the kitchen drawer when I started working here. James felt a lump in his throat. I didn't know that. She was teaching the twins little things. How to set the table properly. How to write thank you notes. How to be gracious, Helen paused. When she passed, those lessons stopped. And I watched those babies start to drift. Getting spoiled. Getting entitled. And I couldn't just stand by and watch it happen. Why didn't you tell me? Would you have listened? You were drowning in grief and work. I tried to talk to you once, remember? About 3 months after she died. I suggested the kids might benefit from helping with small chores around the house. James searched his memory. Had she said that? Probably. He remembered so little from that time. Everything had been a blur of funeral arrangements, lawyers, business meetings, and the crushing weight of trying to hold himself together for his children. I probably dismissed it, he admitted. You did. Politely. But you did. So I figured I'd just do what I could, quietly. Teach them what I could teach them, and hope it made a difference. They sat in silence for a moment. Then James said, It has made a difference. A huge one. And I want to be part of it. Not instead of you. With you. Helen studied his face. You're serious? Completely, she nodded slowly. Okay then. We start tomorrow. But I have rules. Rules? If I'm teaching you, we do this my way. You don't get to be the boss in my classroom. You're a student, same as Lily and Lucas. You do the work, make the mistakes, learn the lessons. Can you handle that? James almost laughed. When was the last time someone had spoken to him like that? Years, maybe decades. Everyone at work treated him like he walked on water. I can handle it, he said. The next morning, Saturday, James came downstairs at 7 to find Helen already in the kitchen with the twins. They were all wearing aprons. "Oh good, you're here," Helen said. "Put this on." She tossed him an apron. For the next 2 hours, Helen taught them how to make breakfast from scratch. Pancakes, scrambled eggs, turkey bacon. James burned his first batch of pancakes. The smoke alarm went off. Lucas thought it was hilarious. "It's okay," Helen said calmly, opening windows. "Everybody burns their first pancakes." "Try again. Lower heat this time." By the end, they had a decent breakfast on the table, food they'd made with their own hands, and somehow it tasted better than anything his private chef had ever prepared. "Now comes the hard part," Helen announced. "What's that?" Lily asked, cleaning up. The twins groaned. James started to suggest they leave it for the cleaning service that came on Saturdays. Then he caught Helen's eye and closed his mouth. They cleaned. James, who hadn't loaded a dishwasher in probably 15 years, relearned how to rinse plates and arrange them properly. Helen showed them how to wipe down counters, sweep floors, and put everything back where it belonged. "A mess is always easier to make than to clean," she said. "That's true in kitchens and in life. So before you make a mess, ask yourself if you're willing to clean it up." Over the following weeks, James cleared his schedule as much as he could. He put his assistant in charge of more decisions. He started saying no to meetings that weren't absolutely critical. And he showed up for Helen's lessons. She taught them about money in practical ways. They went to the grocery store together, all 4 of them. Helen gave each person a list and a budget. James's list included items for a week's worth of dinners. His budget was $75. "That's impossible," he said, looking at the list. "That's what millions of families do every week," Helen replied. "Figure it out." He did. It took him 45 minutes of comparing prices, choosing store brands instead of name brands, and putting things back that he'd impulsively grabbed. He came in at $73 and felt ridiculously proud of himself. They learned to garden together. James got dirt under his fingernails for the first time since childhood. His back ached from bending over plants. And when the first tomato ripened, he felt a sense of accomplishment that no business deal had ever given him. "You see," Helen said, picking the tomato and handing it to him. "You planted this seed 6 weeks ago. You watered it every day. You pulled weeds around it, and now here's your reward. That's how real things work. You invest time and effort, and eventually you get something back." One evening, after the kids had gone to bed, James found Helen sitting in the garden, looking at the sunset. He brought out 2 glasses of lemonade and sat beside her. "Can I ask you something personal?" he said. "You can ask. I might not answer. You've told the kids you raised 3 children alone. What happened to your husband?" Helen was quiet for a long time. "Michael died when my youngest was 6. Heart attack. He was only 38 years old. Just dropped dead one Tuesday morning while getting ready for work." "God, Helen, I'm so sorry." "Me too. We didn't have life insurance. Couldn't afford it. We were living paycheck to paycheck as it was. When he died, I had 3 kids, a mountain of medical bills from the funeral home, and no idea how I was going to survive." "How did you?" "Worked 3 jobs for a while. Cleaning houses during the day, waitressing at night, data entry on weekends when the kids were at my mother's. I slept about 4 hours a night for 2 years. She took a sip of lemonade. "But my kids never went hungry. They always had clean clothes. They stayed in school, and I made sure they knew how to take care of themselves." "Are they successful now?" Helen's face lit up. "My oldest daughter is a nurse. My middle son is a teacher. My youngest is an accountant. They all own their homes. They're all good people, and they all know how to cook, clean, budget, fix things, and handle life when it gets hard." "You did that alone." "I did what I had to do. That's what parents do." She looked at him directly. "But here's the thing, Mr. Richardson. You don't have to do it alone. You have resources I never had. Money, time, help. You just have to use them wisely. Teach your kids that money is a tool, not a solution. That knowing how to do things for yourself is freedom. That the best things in life usually require effort and patience." James nodded slowly. "I'm starting to understand that. Are you?" "Really? What do you mean?" "I mean, you're here now. You're learning. You're trying. But what happens when things get busy again? When some big business crisis comes up, are you going to slip back into old habits? Because kids notice. They notice when you're present and when you're not." The words stung, but they were true. "I don't want to go back," James said. "These last few weeks I've spent more real time with my kids than I have in years. And I've learned more about what matters than my expensive education ever taught me." "Good. Hold on to that." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set behind the trees. Finally, James said, "Helen, I need to tell you something." "What's that?" "Last week, Lily said something to Lucas. I overheard them in their room. She said, 'Miss Helen says being rich isn't about money. It's about having people who love you and knowing how to take care of yourself.'" Helen smiled. She was paying attention. She was. And it made me realize something. I've been teaching them to be rich in all the wrong ways. I've been teaching them that money solves everything, that success means having things. But you've been teaching them what real wealth is. I'm just teaching them what my mama taught me and what I taught my kids. Common sense. Life skills, values. It's more than that, James insisted. You're teaching them dignity, self-reliance, empathy. You're teaching them to see beyond their privilege and understand how the rest of the world lives. Helen set down her glass and looked at him seriously. "Can I be honest with you about something?" "Please." "When I took this job, I almost quit after the first week. Your kids were sweet at heart, but they were spoiled rotten. They didn't say thank you. They didn't pick up after themselves. They complained about everything. And I thought, these poor babies are going to grow up and the world is going to eat them alive." James winced, but he didn't argue. "But then I thought about my own kids," Helen continued, "how hard I had to work to raise them right. And I thought, what if I can give these kids what they're missing? Not a mother. I could never replace their mother. But maybe I could be the person who teaches them what she would have taught them if she'd lived." "You have been," James said quietly. "You absolutely have been." Helen stood up, brushing off her pants. "Well, we're not done yet. Tomorrow we're learning how to change a tire and check the oil in a car. And next week we're fixing that leaky faucet in the downstairs bathroom." "We are?" Everything changed on a Wednesday afternoon when James's mother-in-law came to visit. Barbara Thompson had been traveling in Europe for 3 months. She'd needed space after her daughter's death, time to grieve away from everything that reminded her of what she'd lost. James understood that. He'd wanted to run away too, but now she was back standing in his living room with her designer luggage and she wanted to see her grandchildren. "They're in the garden," James said. "Let me go get them." "I'll come with you," Barbara insisted. "I want to surprise them." They walked through the house and out the back door. From a distance, James could see Helen and the twins working in the vegetable patch. They were laughing about something. All 3 of them had dirt on their clothes. Barbara stopped walking. "James, why are your children playing in the dirt with the help?" The way she said the help made James's jaw tighten. "They're gardening." "Helen's teaching them." "Teaching them what? To be gardeners?" Before James could answer, Lily spotted her grandmother and came running, Lucas close behind. They threw their arms around Barbara, chattering excitedly about the zucchini they'd just harvested and how they were going to make zucchini bread later. Barbara hugged them back, but her smile looked forced. Her eyes kept moving to their dirty hands, their stained clothes, the smudges on their faces. "Darlings, you're filthy," she said. "Let's get you cleaned up." "Where's your nanny?" "We don't have a nanny anymore," Lucas said proudly. "We have Miss Helen. She teaches us cool stuff." Barbara looked at James with confusion and something else. Disapproval, maybe, or concern. That evening, after the twins were in bed, Barbara cornered James in his study. "We need to talk," she said, closing the door behind her. "About what?" "About what's happening to my grandchildren. James, they spent the afternoon telling me about grocery shopping on a budget and fixing leaky pipes. They showed me calluses on their hands from pulling weeds." "Calluses?" "They're learning practical skills. They're children of privilege. They don't need to know how to shop on a budget or fix pipes. That's what staff is for. That's what money is for." James set down the papers he'd been reviewing. "Is that what you think? That money exists, so we never have to learn how to do anything for ourselves? Don't be ridiculous. But there's a difference between learning life skills and whatever this is. Your housekeeper has turned my grandchildren into little laborers. They talked about volunteering at some rundown community center, about old people I've never heard of, about growing vegetables like we're living through the Depression. They're happy," James said quietly. "Happier than they've been in 2 years. They're confused. They're being taught that their life of privilege is something to be ashamed of. That woman is filling their heads with ideas that don't match their reality." "What woman? You mean Helen?" "The housekeeper, yes. I'm sure she's very nice, but James, she's overstepping. Badly. Her job is to clean the house and maybe watch the children when you're working, not to turn them into her personal project. James stood up, feeling heat rise in his chest. Helen isn't a project, and she's teaching them things I should have taught them. Things their mother would have taught them if she were still alive. Barbara's face went pale. Don't you dare. Don't you dare bring Catherine into this. Why not? It's true. Catherine used to cook with them. She taught them manners, gratitude, how to think about other people, and when she died, those lessons stopped. I was too buried in grief and work to pick up where she left off. Helen did what I should have been doing. So you're saying I raised my daughter wrong? That teaching children about privilege and responsibility means making them scrub floors and dig in gardens? I'm saying that money without character creates miserable people, and our kids were heading in that direction. Barbara sat down heavily in one of the leather chairs. She looked older suddenly. Tired. I loved my daughter more than anything in this world. Losing her nearly destroyed me, and now I come back and find that everything she built for her children is being dismantled by a stranger. Her voice cracked on that last word, and James felt his anger deflate. This wasn't about Helen. This was about grief, about control, about Barbara trying to hold on to some piece of her daughter through these children. He sat down across from her. I know you're hurting. I am too, every single day. But Barbara, Catherine would have loved what Helen's doing. You know she would have. How can you say that? Because Catherine was never comfortable with all this wealth. You know that. She grew up with money, but she never forgot that most people don't have it. She volunteered. She donated. She insisted on the kids having chores even though I thought it was silly since we had staff. She wanted them to grow up grounded. Barbara's eyes filled with tears. She did say that. She worried about them becoming spoiled. And after she died, they did get spoiled. Because I didn't know how to be both parents. I didn't know how to balance providing for them and teaching them. So I just threw money at everything and hoped it would be enough. It wasn't. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Barbara said, "Tell me about this, Helen." So James did. He told her everything. The budgeting lessons, the garden, the cooking, the volunteering, the way his children had transformed from entitled bored kids into thoughtful, engaged human beings. "And she's teaching you too?" Barbara asked when he finished. "Yes. Because I realized I needed those lessons just as much as they did." Barbara wiped her eyes. Catherine would have liked her. I think so too. But the conversation with Barbara planted a seed of doubt in James's mind. That night he lay in bed wondering if he was doing the right thing. Was he helping his children or confusing them? Was Helen a blessing or was he letting her overstep her role? The next morning he found Helen in the kitchen earlier than usual. She was packing up her things. "What are you doing?" James asked. Helen didn't look at him. "I heard your conversation last night. The walls are thin. Your mother-in-law is right. I've overstepped. Way overstepped. This isn't my place." "Helen, stop." "No, Mr. Richardson, I need to say this. I got too involved. I let myself pretend like these were my kids, like this was my family. But it's not. You hired me to clean your house, and instead I've been playing teacher and trying to fix things that aren't mine to fix. You're not fixing things. You're helping us, am I?" Helen finally looked at him and her eyes were red. "Or am I confusing those kids about who they are? Their grandmother is right. They're rich kids. They're always going to be rich kids. Maybe teaching them to live like they're poor is doing them a disservice." James grabbed a chair and sat down, motioning for her to do the same. She hesitated, then sat. "Do you remember what you told me in the garden?" he asked. "About your husband dying and having to raise 3 kids alone?" "Of course. You said you worked 3 jobs, slept 4 hours a night, made sure your kids never went hungry, and now they're all successful, good people who know how to handle life. What's your point?" "My point is that you didn't raise victims. You didn't raise people who crumble when things get hard. You raised survivors, strong people, and that's what you're teaching my kids. Not to be poor, to be strong." Helen shook her head. "But they'll never need to survive the way my kids did. They'll never have to choose between paying the electric bill and buying food. Maybe not, but life has other ways of testing people. Grief, loss, failure. Things money can't fix. And when those tests come, do you want my kids to fall apart? Or do you want them to have the strength and skills to handle it?" "I want them to be okay," Helen said softly. "Then don't quit. Please. Because before you came into our lives, they weren't okay. They were lost. And so was I. Helen was quiet for a long time. Finally, she said, "Why are you doing this? Really? You could hire the best tutors in the world, send your kids to fancy programs. Why do you want me?" James thought about how to answer. "Because you teach from love, not from a curriculum. Because you've lived a real life, not just studied one. Because you're teaching my children that the size of your bank account doesn't determine the size of your character. And because for the first time in 2 years I feel like I'm actually being a father instead of just a provider." "I'm scared," Helen admitted. "What if I'm doing this wrong? What if I'm messing them up instead of helping them?" "We're all scared. That's what parenting is. One long exercise in hoping you're not completely screwing up." James leaned forward. "But Helen, I've seen the change in my kids. They're kinder, more thoughtful, more engaged with life. They ask questions instead of demanding things. They say thank you without being prompted. They actually care about people who aren't just like them. If that's messing them up, then I want more of it." Helen smiled despite her tears. "Your mother-in-law thinks I'm corrupting them. My mother-in-law is grieving and scared. Once she spends more time with them, she'll see what I see. And what's that? That you're giving them the greatest gift anyone could give them. You're teaching them how to be human." Helen stood up and unpacked her bag. Then she looked at James seriously. "If I'm going to keep doing this, we need to do it right. Not secretly, not as some side project. We need to make this official." "What do you mean?" 4 months later, James stood in his backyard watching something he never thought he'd see. His mother-in-law was on her hands and knees in the garden, showing a group of children how to plant herbs. "Basil likes warm weather," Barbara was saying, her expensive pants covered in dirt. "But cilantro is tricky. It doesn't like the heat too much. You have to find the right spot for it." The children around her weren't his kids. They were from the community center. 8 kids whose families didn't have much, who'd never had a garden, who thought vegetables came from stores and nowhere else. This had been Lily's idea. "Miss Helen taught us," his daughter had said 3 weeks ago at dinner. "So why can't we teach other kids? Kids who don't have big yards like ours?" And just like that, the Saturday Garden Club had been born. James walked over to where Helen stood watching, a satisfied smile on her face. "You started something," he said. "No," Helen corrected. "We started something." Big difference, she was right. After their conversation in the kitchen 4 months ago, everything had changed. James had sat down with Helen and the twins, and they'd created what Helen called a family learning plan. Not just for the kids, for all of them. James had officially changed Helen's title to Family Development Coordinator. He'd tripled her salary. But more importantly, he'd made her a real part of their family's life, not just an employee watching from the sidelines. The twins had embraced it completely. They'd started helping Helen plan lessons. They'd asked if they could invite friends over to learn too. They'd wanted to share what they were discovering. And Barbara, who'd been so against it at first, had slowly come around. It started when she visited again 2 weeks after their argument. She'd watched Helen teach the kids how to make a budget for a pretend household, watched them struggle with hard choices, watched them learn to prioritize and plan. Afterward, Barbara had pulled James aside. "I was wrong," she'd said simply. "Catherine would love this." Now here she was, teaching gardening to kids from across town, her jewelry and designer clothes forgotten in the joy of watching a child's face light up when they planted their first seed. "Mr. James," a small voice called out. He turned to see Tommy, a 7-year-old from the community center, running toward him with a tomato. "Look, we grew this." "That's incredible, Tommy. Miss Helen says we can take some vegetables home to our families. My mom's going to be so happy. She loves tomatoes, but they're expensive at the store." James felt that familiar twist in his chest, the one that happened whenever he realized how much he'd been missing, how much he'd taken for granted. "Make sure you take plenty," James said, "and Miss Helen will teach you how to grow them at home too if you want." Tommy's eyes went wide. "Really?" "Really." After the garden club ended and all the families had gone home with bags of vegetables, James found his kids in the outdoor shower, hosing dirt off their legs and laughing about something. "Dad, watch this," Lucas called out. He'd learned to juggle over the past few weeks. Not well, but he was trying. 3 tennis balls flew into the air and he managed to catch 2 of them. "Getting better," James said. "Miss Helen says if I practice every day for a month, I'll get it. She says most things worth doing take at least a month of practice." James thought about that. Helen had been teaching him the same lesson. Patience, persistence, the understanding that growth happens slowly, not overnight. He'd been practicing too. Practicing being present, practicing listening instead of solving, practicing being a father instead of just a provider. That evening, after the twins went to bed, James, Helen, and Barbara sat in the garden with glasses of iced tea. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. "I've been thinking," James said, "about what we're doing here. About how it started. What about it?" Helen asked. "It shouldn't just be us. There are thousands of families like mine. People with money but no idea how to teach their kids what really matters. And there are people like you, Helen, who have so much wisdom but are stuck in jobs that don't value it." "What are you saying?" Barbara asked. "I'm saying I want to start a program. A real one. Bring together people from different backgrounds to teach kids. Not just rich kids, all kids. Life skills, values, practical knowledge. The things schools don't teach." Helen set down her glass. "That's a big idea. It is. But I have the resources to make it happen. And I have you if you're willing." "Willing to do what?" "To help me build it. To train other people to teach what you've taught us. To make this bigger than just our family." Barbara leaned forward. "I want to help too. I have time and resources. And after seeing what this has done for Lily and Lucas, I think every child deserves it." Helen looked between them, her eyes bright. "You're serious?" "Completely," James said. "I've already talked to the community center. They want to partner with us. And I've reached out to some other families I know. People who've seen the change in my kids and want the same thing for theirs. But it's not about making rich kids feel good about themselves," Helen said firmly. "It has to be real. It has to bring people together. Mix kids from different backgrounds so they learn from each other." "Exactly," James agreed. "That's the whole point. Breaking down walls. Teaching everyone that we all have something to learn from each other." They talked late into the night planning. By the time they said goodnight, they had the rough outline of what would become the Life Skills Exchange program. 3 months after that, James stood in front of a room full of parents. Rich and poor, from every background. All of them there because they wanted their kids to learn more than what traditional school offered. Helen stood beside him, no longer nervous about speaking in front of crowds. She'd found her voice. "We're not here to teach your kids to be rich or poor," Helen told the crowd. "We're here to teach them to be capable, to be kind, to understand that every person has value, regardless of what's in their bank account, and to give them skills that will serve them for life no matter what life throws at them." The program launched with 40 families. By the end of the year, there were 200. Kids learning to budget, cook, garden, fix things, volunteer, and most importantly, connect with people different from themselves. James started bringing the twins to work sometimes, not to show off but to teach them about business. But he also made sure they kept up with their garden work, their volunteering, their Saturday lessons with Helen. One Sunday morning, almost a year after James had come home early and discovered Helen teaching his children, he woke up to sounds from the kitchen. He went downstairs to find Lily and Lucas making breakfast. Helen wasn't even there. They were doing it on their own. "Morning, Dad," Lily said, flipping a pancake with confidence. "We made enough for 3. Miss Helen should be here soon." Lucas was setting the table. 3 places. Not having staff do it. Doing it himself because he knew how and because it mattered. James sat down and watched his children work together. They moved around the kitchen with purpose and skill. They cleaned up as they went. They talked about their plans for the day, which included helping a neighbor fix a fence and then working in the garden. When Helen arrived, she stopped in the doorway, taking in the scene. "Well, look at this. We wanted to surprise you," Lucas said. "And Dad, to say thank you." "Thank you for what?" James asked, though his throat was tight. "For teaching us that we can do things ourselves," Lily said. "That we don't need other people to do everything for us. That being able to take care of yourself and other people is like the most important thing ever." Helen sat down at the table and James saw tears in her eyes. "You two are going to change the world someday." "Maybe," Lucas said. "But first we're going to change our neighborhood." Tommy asked if we could help him start a garden at his apartment building. The landlord said yes. After breakfast, James found Helen in the garden checking on the tomatoes. "You know what the best part of all this is?" he said. "What's that?" "A year ago, if someone had told me that the most important person in my life would be my housekeeper, I would have thought they were crazy. I would have been wrong about so many things, Helen smiled. I'm not just your housekeeper anymore. No, your family. You're the person who saved us when we didn't even know we needed saving. You saved yourselves. I just showed you the door. You're the ones who walked through it. James looked at his house, his garden, his life. It looked different now. Not smaller, but more real. More lived in. More full of purpose. His kids were growing up to be good people. Not because they had money. Not because they had every advantage. But because someone had cared enough to teach them what really mattered, and he was growing too. Learning that being rich wasn't about the size of his bank account. It was about the richness of his relationships, the depth of his character, and his ability to handle whatever life brought. You know what I realized? James said. That day I came home early and saw you teaching my kids about budgeting. I thought you were teaching them about money. I was. But you weren't, not really. You were teaching them about life, about choices and consequences and values, about being human. And I'm grateful every single day that I came home early and saw it, because if I hadn't, I would have missed everything that mattered. Helen put her hand on his shoulder. Your wife would be proud of you. Of all of you, I hope so, I know so.